Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this morning's Scrutiny Committee, the Place Scrutiny Committee on Thursday, the 25th of May. The first item on the agenda is to elect a chair. So please can I ask for a nomination and a seconder for chair of the Scrutiny Committee?
I'd like to propose Councillor Dimmock, if I may.
Okay, please could we have a seconder?
Second.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Dimmock, if you could take over and we'll appoint a vice chair. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Davis and Councillor Lucas. I've always enjoyed chairing Place. Thank you. So we'll move on to item 2, to elect a vice chair. And on that, I would like to nominate Councillor Lucas. And Councillor Davis has seconded her. Thank you. Congratulations, Councillor Lucas. Item 4 is declarations of interest. I will take these as and when, unless anyone would like to do this now. But I think we've already established that there's no declarations of interest unless there are something that crops up. We'll do it as and when. The public open forum, we've got no members of the public joining us today. So we'll swiftly move on to item 6, which is public spaces protection order for dog controls. And I understand we've got cabinet member Councillor Griffiths doing an introduction on this report, and then it will be Hugh Owen and David Jones that will come in after. So over to you, Councillor Griffiths.
Thanks very much, Chair. This is the second meeting in a row that the Place Scrutiny Committee is considering the Public Spaces Protection Order. At the last meeting, there was support, which I learned from, for taking forward the proposal for public spaces protection orders for dog controls relating to dog exclusion area zones, dogs on lead zones, and there was support for us going forward to a public consultation on those powers and their application to specific places. The team has been working on the draft order and the approach to public consultation, and they want to bring that work to the consideration of the committee this morning. So I will hand over to the team now.
Thank you, Councillor Griffiths, and thank you, Chair. As Councillor Griffiths has advised, this report quickly follows our report to committee on the 19th of April. I therefore keep my summary short, but mindful that some members or interested persons tuning in may not have been present in our previous meeting, so I'll give a few pertinent background points. Currently, Council has a designation order made under the Dogs Found in the Land Act 1996, which makes it an offence for a dog owner not to pick up dog mess if it fouls certain designated areas under the order. Typically urban areas, roads where the speed limits are less than 40 miles per hour, etc. In addition, we have a Give the Dog Fouling the Red Card working group, which has been going on for about 7 or 8 years. This is close working between the County Council and in particular the waste and street cleaning sections, environmental health and our town and community councils. The emphasis over the last 7 or 8 years has been on sharing resource, maximising results and trying to change behaviour by raising awareness. In fact, today we've got an Action Day Awareness Raising Day, which is being taking place in Caldicot and Usk through the Give Dog Fouling Red Card Working Group. This collaborative working is certainly a positive contribution, and it's certainly our intention to continue on the good work that's being done. Indeed, the need to explore what else can be done to help raise awareness and take full advantage of the legislation at the Council's disposal very much comes out of this collaborative working with the town and community councils. Public spaces protection orders provide the opportunity to set the controls we want in the public spaces in the county. So as the report provides, which is built on 3 previous reports that we've done, we're now in a position to produce a draft public space protection order on the dog controls that we feel unmerited, following quite extensive consultation, both with the public and with the town and community councils. So Appendix 1 provides a draft PSPO for members' attention. I think it would be helpful for me to quickly summarise for members the restrictions proposed, which are detailed in Section 5, or Paragraph 5 of Appendix 1. Part 1 is the dog fouling controls, and this is proposed to be county-wide. So quite simply, if your dog fouls a public space in the county, the person in charge of the dog is required to pick up the dog mess. So that's a basic restriction which we feel from a public health point of view is very important. Part 2 is a requirement for a person in charge of a dog to carry appropriate bags so that they can pick up the dog mess. Again, that's proposed to be county-wide. This was endorsed by members in our previous meeting on the 19th of April. It's simple and straightforward, and it shows the intent of the dog owners to pick up the dog mess when they walk in, and the ability to pick up a dog mess when they walk in their dogs. So those two restrictions are to apply to public spaces county-wide. Part 3, again to apply county-wide, is if your dog is seen to be causing distress or alarm in a public space, an authorised officer can ask a person in charge to put that dog on a short lead. Again, to apply county-wide. Parts 4 and 5 of the draft PSPO are the dogs and leads and exemption areas which are proposed. These are very much the result of a consultation that we've been undertaking over the last 6 months plus with the various MCC, Monmouthshire County Council sections, whether or not it's education, leisure, the waste and street cleaning section, town and community councils, and the private owners, landowners responsible for public spaces. In essence, marked sports pitches, children's play areas, which are in public spaces, are largely in that list as proposed as exemption areas. There are a number of leads areas as well, such as the skate parks and cemeteries. And then there are a number of other areas either proposed by the private landowners, which are public spaces, and a number of areas proposed by town and community councils. I should advise members that that list of leads areas and exemption areas may be subject to very minor change before it goes out for public consultation. And in essence, that's the Public Spaces Protection Order. Members will see that there are exemptions listed in the order, which we feel need to apply. The legislation requires consultation on a draft PSPO as provided in 3.1 and 3.12 and 3.13, and a 2-month wide-ranging public consultation is now proposed. It's our intention, following that public consultation, which is probably going to take place from mid-June to mid-August, following that public consultation on a draft PSPO, we'll then be in a position to report back to place scrutiny with a final public space protection order for further scrutiny before going to the appropriate cabinet member for sign-off. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugh. It's lovely to have you back. Obviously, I think all members here are fully aware of the issues and complaints it causes councillors. I think I read recently that 40% of adults think dog fouling is one of the most annoying things they experience in public places, worse than litter, pollution, traffic. So, yeah, we've got to act on this. So, first off, I have Councillor Emma Bryn with a question.
Thank you for that. With a number of tragic stories involving uncontrolled dogs in the press recently, it feels timely for us to take these steps to protect our residents. Can officers please summarise exactly where and when this PSPO will be enforced, and would all ground staff receive letters informing them that they're able to enforce the order? And I also noticed that much of the listed areas, including Chipping and Mead in Monmouth, exclude dogs completely, as sports fields now consume the vast majority of the green space on Chipping and Mead. If dogs are excluded from the sports field, rather than a lead-only request, this will exclude dog owners from much of what is meant to be a public shared space. Will this enforcement be in place during public events on the Mead, such as the Bee Festival and the Carnival? And what steps will the council be taking to ensure that all residents are informed of this change? Will posters be created for display in public spaces and veterinary surgeries and kennels, for example? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bryn. I may have missed one or two of the first points, so please, if I don't answer them, pick me up. Chipping and Mead was mentioned. Yep. This list has been very much produced through consultation, firstly with the town and community councils, and with the Waste and Streets cleaning section and various MCC sections. It's a draft PSPO, and the whole idea is that we will now go to public consultation, wide-ranging public consultation, to draw to the attention of our citizens, our intentions, and take on board the feedback. The intention is that dogs are to be excluded from the marked sports pitches, which are listed, and that's when they are marked. The idea, quite simply, behind that is when sports are played on those marked sports pitches, but there's no chance of any dog fouling dog mess on them. As to when the PSPO actually comes into force, all areas, all leads areas, all exemption areas will need to be appropriately signposted at the entrances and their exits, making quite clear the restrictions in place. In addition, the PSPO would be displayed on a website. You'll notice that every leads area, every exemption area has got a link in the appendix, and that takes you onto the Monmouthshire Council's mapping system. So any member of the public on the internet can click on the link and see exactly the area that's covered. Of course, many don't have access to the internet, and so again, it's imperative that every leads area or exemption area is signposted at the entrances and exits. I think there are one or two points I may have missed.
Shall I just pick up a couple of the earlier ones? I think referring to dangerous dog legislation, so that's currently with the police. I think there's a recognition nationally it's a problem, isn't it? And Grant Police have had some serious incidents, and Caerphilly, I know, had two, I think, recently. So nationally they are thinking of that as well. So they are looking at the legislation specifically around dangerous dogs and responsible dog ownership. It does rest with the police, but certainly we'd link in with that. We've obviously got animal licensing officers as well. Dog breeding, etc. is a big issue. So Welsh Government are trying to link that together to pick up the dangerous dog legislation, which they do think requires updating. I think the wider question then is about enforcement in general. I think we did have quite a conversation last meeting about that. And it's to be widened out. We've got civil enforcement officers, we've got obviously the police community safety officers, so will be an opportunity to reflect on who we've got, who we can tap into to obviously ensure that there is some enforcement work that goes on. And it's not people hiding behind a bush necessarily, but working on local intelligence would be the way forward. So hopefully I think Hugh's given an overview of that's one of the tactics, isn't it? That give the dog the red card scheme works well, and the outcome is we're getting less complaints through from an environmental health perspective regarding dog fouling. So we will need to obviously look at that enforcement issue wider then with colleagues in other sections to make sure we've got some capacity there. Thanks. The final thing on that is further to the budget decision in March, it was that there's some money for a review which covers up littering, so we'll also pick up dog fouling at the same time within that review. Thanks.
Thank you, David. I've just come to one further point, and this is working based on the point of enforcement. Yeah, it's imperative that we continue to work closely with the town community councils through Gift Dog Phone and Red Card, because the intelligence that we get from that, the hotspot areas, and that's going to be the same when the Leeds areas, exemption areas come into force, as to where the potential breaches are, so that our officers can follow those up appropriately then.
Could I just elaborate on a little bit? There was one little bit that wasn't answered. My concern is, you say the mark fields will be excluded, and my concern with Chippenham Fields in general, because that's the one that's the area I'm most familiar with. It's a multi-use area, and they're all permanently marked for football pitches and rugby pitches, but it is multi-use, so they do have fates and things on those marked pitches, and which is why I wanted to know when these, if you're excluding dogs completely and not just saying lead only, will this be a timed exclusion? Will they be allowed when there are fates on? It's subtle nuances like that I'd like to kind of understand a little better. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bin. At the moment, it's proposed, but they'll be excluded when the pitches are marked. So that would be, if the pitches are marked all year round, they would be excluded all year round. Certainly, it has come from public consultation, and what officers have considered is, should it be seasonal? But of course, then that links into enforcement issues, and there is a general feeling that pitches are marked and kept marked when sports are played. Now, obviously, there are going to be certain sites which may be marked throughout the year, such as potentially Chippenham Mead. But that will mean then that the dogs will be excluded throughout that year. Well, the idea of this public consultation moving forward is to again seek further views on this. The Town and Community Council, Monmouth Town and Community Council may want to make further representation, as may obviously the members of the public. So that's the whole idea of this. We are where we are with the proposals from a consultation taking place. There's a myriad of views on this, the rights and wrongs. From the public consultation we did a couple of years ago, I think we had about 1,400 responses. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this develops.
Just to add to that, Bailey Park's exactly the same issue. I think we've got a steam rally rolling up this weekend. So I chair the event safety group, so I think we need to think about that in terms of not being pedantic, isn't it? Someone's strolling past the Labrador on a lead, it doesn't suddenly become an exclusion zone because it's within the confines of where the rugby pitch is 2 weeks previous. So I think we're just going to have to think that through in terms of the common sense approach. But yeah, thanks for flagging it up.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think some further consideration has definitely got to be given to that, because you're going to end up punishing good dog owners because of a minority, as a dog owner myself. Next, we have Councillor Jackie Strong.
Okay, I also want to touch on some of the things that Councillor Bryn has raised as well. I note that, from the comments, I didn't get from the report that it wouldn't be, that it would be just marked areas. I'm looking specifically sort of the link for Caldecott, and obviously the leisure centre, the cricket field, and the walkway from sort of Deep Weir to the town centre. I gather that is going to be an active travel route. So how does the exclusion zones fit with that? I too have got a dog who's comes along with me quite a lot to different events. I'm concerned that given the proposals for the Caldecott site, it's not just marked pitches, it's like a blanket area. A lot of that area is cordoned off because of the artificial pitches. The cricket field and the football area by Subbrook Cricket field and area is fenced off, but it will also mean that how does that affect families that want to go and watch their young people play football on the touchline with their pet animal? quite a lot of dog owners go and watch the cricket of a weekend, that would be an exclusion zone so that they won't be able to walk their dog and sit and watch the cricket. Also, I'm also concerned with the bit from sort of Deep Weir towards Denny View. That's quite a well-used path. So if you could separate those areas out and have a dog walking, sort of walkway through, I think that would be beneficial. I'm also thinking about safe spaces for the more people that you can get using their legs and exercising, it's beneficial for health and their well-being. So the more people we can get out using those footpaths, the better. It's better for safety, and so if you can include dog walkers within that, it's better for the whole community. I really get that dogs should not be fouling on sports pitches and the like, but it's also balancing that with the well-being of people that have got sort of pets, really. So, and I also want to take issue with the consultation. I gather from Councillor Stevens that it hasn't come to sort of County Cork Town Council, and so when you say people have been consulted, how widely has that been? And also, if you're going to consult over the summer, how successful might that be? So that's a couple of things, really. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Strong. Firstly, the point about marked sports pitches. The exemption areas listed, which cover marked sports pitches, doesn't mean that people can't be on a touchline with their dogs on the lead. So they can. The areas are mapped and they invite further comment. And that's the whole idea of a public consultation, is to invite further comment. And there will be, again, a myriad of comments and suggestions and proposals, and we've got to try and balance. The whole idea of this public space protection order is to be proportionate, is to be reasonable, and to take into account the various comments and feedback that we get. However, somewhere the line and the boundaries have to be drawn. There has been wide-ranging public consultation. Caldicot Town and Community Council, together with all the other town and community councils, have been consulted directly in recent months. Every town and community council has had an email proposing the exemption areas and leads areas, and inviting comments and inviting agreement or not, or suggestions. Now that is merely, well, I won't say merely, but the purpose of that is to bring us to where we are now with a list. And the whole idea is to move forward with that list for a wide-ranging public consultation to seek views. And there'll be many, many views on every single site as to where the boundaries should be. And we'll obviously take account of those views and hopefully then be in a position to come back to committee in 3 months or so with then a proposed final version. I think that's all the points which you raised. Town and community councils will be directly consulted again. So in the legislation requires consultation. It doesn't map out exactly what that consultation should entail, but it is our intention to make it as wide-ranging as possible. So we'll be certainly raising awareness of it through the Give Dog Phone a Red Card, for which Caldicot Town Council members attend. Every town and community council will be directly emailed with the draft order, and we'll be doing all the usual things in making the public aware that the consultation's out there and inviting feedback. So again, many comments expected, and we will take those on board to come up with a final version.
It was just that I was a bit horrified to see that it was just such a big blanket area, and so maybe, to know that I'm not going to get a huge fine if I take the dog over to watch the cricket on a Sunday afternoon is helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Strong. Next, I have Councillor Buckler.
Thank you, Chair. Well, there seem to be a lot of dog owners in this committee today, so we've all got a vested interest. What I would say is, following on from Councillor Strong, that, you know, dogs not being walked adds to the unruly dog problem and out-of-control dogs. So we need to encourage people to walk their dogs. So if we could, you know, consider paths through so that we can actively encourage that. There can be a real problem with foul-smelling overflow bins of dog muck, so off-putting and detrimental to our public spaces. So how do we work to address this? How can we make people take responsibility for their dog waste? I personally think you should be completely responsible for it and take it away. How can we encourage people to do that rather than just leave it for someone else to deal with it? It's all about this sort of lack of responsibility for your dogs. Regarding public places in rural areas and footpaths, will rural commons be included in this? And what about, rural footpaths and bridleways? If you're trying to encourage this new dawn for sorting out the dog problems, whether it's messes or dangerous dogs, how are you going to incorporate the rural situation? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Buckler. I think a very important aspect of this PSPO process, which I haven't mentioned, is it opens up conversations, doesn't it? It raises awareness of the problems that we have. And again, there's going to be many, many views as to the rights and wrongs and what we should do and what we shouldn't do about the situation. As far as I'm concerned, raising awareness and opening up our conversation is exactly what we need. And that, whilst the PSPO does not cover and cannot cover what people actually do with that dog mess once it's been put in a bag, obviously if they pick it up and it's in their hand and then they throw it down on the ground, then they've breached the PSPO. The current position is that their dog bins are provided largely through the town and community councils. And this PSPO doesn't look to change that and can't change that. But through this process, it does help raise awareness as to the issues that we've got and will help encourage, through those conversations, people to take the dog mess home and to dispose of it, which they can, in their household waste. As to the point about dangerous dogs, again, Dave has referred to Dave Jones's earlier comments. That really is a matter for the police, but it is being looked at nationally. Mentioned common areas and the rural areas. Yes, the draft PSPO is for anybody in the county in a public space to pick up the dog mess if it follows a public space. When it comes to enforcement, we are going to be typically looking at enforcement in the urban areas naturally. The enforcement has to be proportionate, it has to be reasonable, and our officers are going to be trained as to the sort of instances where enforcement action is taken and it's not. So it's a common sense approach is needed. I think we all agree that if a dog fouls a public space, you really need to pick up that dog mess after it. Again, as to paths through exemption areas, etc., which is a race, no doubt that's going to be picked up through the consultation that we're going to be that's going to take place, and each area will have to be looked at on a case-by-case basis and continue to be looked at. So when we come back to committee in a few months' time with the final version of the PSPO, that we can be satisfied that it is as watertight and as proportionate and as reasonable as we need it to be. Hope that answers your questions, Councillor.
Thank you.
Next, we have Councillor McConnell.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for this report. The whole issue is of concern to residents and something I'm frequently in conversation with residents about. So in terms of the consultation, I will be, and I'd encourage any other councillor, will include the fact of this consultation. I'll promote this consultation in my regular newsletters to residents, so that gets through every door in my ward, and there's no reason why it shouldn't across. And I suspect many of my colleagues will have the same concerns expressed to them. So that's part of that conversation. This is just a small question. In the section on part 3, I think, about unruly or dangerous dogs, you mentioned a short lead of 2 metres length, and then there's a lead mentioned further on part 4. A lead is defined as something which is of 2 metres length, and I'm just wondering where those leads which extend and retract come into this. I mean, they're a good and bad thing. I mean, I have seen people getting tangled up in them. On the other hand, people do use them to control their dogs. So was that given thought in the definition of what a lead is?
Thank you, Councillor McConnell, and also for you, as you said, chairing this consultation. We need it to be as wide-ranging as possible with members of the public. Yes, it has been given a lot of thought. You'll find actually by looking at the PSPOs through the various local authorities in Wales, and I believe there are 15 of the local authorities in Wales do have a public space protection order. Majority of them refer to dogs on a lead, and we've got to draw the line somewhere, and it will be that short lead of 2 metres. Now, of course, many of those leads are extendable, and I think a case is that if your dog's seen causing alarm or distress, an authorised person says, well, look, put it on a short lead, then it's a matter of drawing in that lead, that extendable lead, so it's around about 2 metres. I don't think any enforcement officer is going to be going there with a measuring tape and saying, well, it's 2 metres. But the emphasis there is that it should be a short lead.
Thank you. And lastly, we've got Councillor Maria Stevens.
Thank you very much. The authorised or enforcement officers, yes, that's a brilliant idea, but how many will there be, and what enforcement are they actually going to carry out? That's one question. And also, on the signs, I find sometimes there's too much dialogue and not enough graphics on the signs. I think if there were clearer graphics where anybody can read them, no matter which language they tell, or and I can give you an example. I had my 3 little ones over in the King George V playing fields not so long ago, and a gentleman drove up. He got his dog out of the car. The dog went for the 3 little ones, snapping around their ankles. I tried to engage with the gentleman. He didn't want to know. A few words were blasted to me in front of the children. Children were crying. The dog ran off with the football. He ran into the play park. I tried my best to make the dialogue pleasant to him. But no, he walked the dog. No, sorry, he didn't walk the dog. The dog ran around for about 20 minutes. Did all his business over the play park. And he then got in the car and drove off with the dog. Now, there are big signs on that field. Dogs must be on a lead. No fouling. There's dog bins there. Now, how is a gentleman, I'll call him, how will an enforcement stop that man from doing something like that? And I've seen him over there regularly. And nothing sometimes is going to stop irresponsible dog owners carrying out that. Doesn't matter how many officers you've got. I did take the registration of the gentleman's car. I've got it on my file. And you've mentioned police, but I mean, I wouldn't consider contacting the police over it, but if there was an enforcement officer that I could send that registration number to, that would, to me, would be a result. Because, like I say, the rest, and I'd just like to find out how many officers, and would they be mobile around Monmouthshire, or would there be designated areas which they stay in? So it's a couple of things there. And I'm sorry it's a personal note, but it was it could have been a tragic incident. So yeah, we want to eradicate that kind of thing, and hopefully things will work. But I just needed to enlighten you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stevens. Yes, some very pertinent points. First of all, this PSPO will be an opportunity to rationalise what's going on with signs in the county. Bailey Park, for example, and a number of other parks will have many different signs. I think I touched on this in previous meetings. Pick up a dog mess, you'll refer to previous, perhaps Monmouth Borough Council signs there. I think I did see a sign a few years ago from Crickhowell Rural District Council. Now, I've been around a long time, but even when I joined the council, that was before Crickhowell Rural District Council was involved. So it'll be an opportunity to look at if we go in to have an exemption or Leeds area in a certain zone. And I've got to say that this PSPO is not just about Leeds areas and exemption areas, because they are just going to be in certain areas. That this will be an opportunity to rationalise what's going on with the signs. We will be looking at the signs that are up and running in our neighbouring local authorities. For example, I live in the Rhondda and Taff area. Very recently walked in one of the big parks there, and the sign was superb. It clearly set out with diagrams what you can do in those areas. Particularly important where you've got multi-use locations. So it showed the perimeter of a park, and it showed certain areas where you can take withdrawings, where you can take the dogs on leads, where the exemption areas, etc. Signposting, yeah, is crucial. It has been done. We can learn from other local authorities. As to a point of enforcement, there is enforcement at the moment, Councillor Stevens, certainly with regards to dog fouling. We are very much led by intelligence, and we will continue to be led by intelligence. The whole idea of this PSPO is to set up a system of controls. But we know from past experience, and again I've touched on this in previous meetings, that effective enforcement has to be intelligence-led and has to be reactive. Proactive patrolling, certainly we've got reservations with, because when do people not pick up after their dog? When do they cause contraventions? Tend to be when other people are not around. So it is a matter of working, of the PSPO, of giving, adding extra tools to the toolbox of the local authorities, so that when we get appropriate intelligence, we can follow up on that and take appropriate action. As to the recent incident, if there's a fouling area on a fouling incident, person not picking up in a designated area, you can report that to environmental health, and if we've got a registration number, we can follow that up. As to the numbers of enforcement officers, again, I think I've explained, but this really is cross-cutting across the various MCC sections. So the leisure department, the schools, the countryside section, waste and street cleaning have all fed into this report. It certainly, when the council's looking to authorise and to see who's going to be suitable to be authorised officers, there's going to be the potential there, as opposed to just environmental health officers or officers from waste and street cleaning, which is the current point. There'll be the potential to broaden that out if the chief officers, senior leadership team and members consider that to be appropriate to do so. Again, enforcement's got to be proportionate. The officers got to be well trained, but it's not going to be a case of a number of officers out there proactively patrolling. It's going to be a case of a number of officers having the authorization to act on local intel when needed. Hope that answers your questions.
So can I just come back? So that gentleman's red car registration number, would that be intelligence? I mean, really, that's the kind of thing that I would need to know.
Yes, certainly.
Thank you, Councillor Stevens. Next is Councillor Lucas, and then I'm going to allow Councillor Webb to come in.
Thank you very much for the report, and thank you to listening to all the others. I have to say I agree wholeheartedly with pretty much everything that's been said. Councillor Strong made some very valid, and Councillor Byrne actually, some very valid points. Councillor Byrne and I both from Monmouth, obviously, and one of the things that Emma is trying to say is the definition of the playing fields. Now, I get that completely, but there's an awful lot of paths run through, which is what Councillor Strong was referring to. Now, one of the things I was wondering, because there's 40, I'm also on the town council, I should also add, there are 42 dog poo bins that we pay for at town council in Monmouth, all over Monmouth. So that's an awful lot of dog poo, and they get emptied every week. Now, the cost to the taxpayer through town council is huge. That's one of our biggest bills, as everyone will know. So my one worry is that I'm sure we all pretty much here today, as most of us said, we've all got dogs. So it's an important part of our well-being, both for us and for our dog. It's highly important that we get to exercise them. So taking on board the thought that we really do want to protect our sports field for the purpose of being a sports field, but at the same time, Chippenham Mead, I understand, for example, is it's got in-trust rules and God knows what on it, the legislation is restricting things. Could we perhaps fence off the sports field area? I know perhaps that's a cost which we might not want to hear, or could we provide a dog exercising area that also deals with that issue? All I'm trying to say is that people really do want to loose run a dog as well. I understand the need to be on lead, absolutely, I get it, all about being in control, but at the same time, there is an element of where can you safely exercise your dog legitimately. And I was just wondering if that's been thought about, and whether is it easier perhaps to fence, or could we, I'm sorry, I know the money fields go there, fence the sport fields, or could we do it as in an exercise area for dogs? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, interesting, isn't it? Just the feedback that we get in here about the exemption areas and the leads areas, which members are focusing on, which I think is great, because it gives the opportunity, and this is what we're proposing, to go out to public consultation and to seek further comments on the proposals, which have already gone through extensive consultation to get where we are. So it's going to be interesting how this moves forward, and again, there's going to be so many different views. We're not looking necessarily to fence areas off, because that's got cost implications, and amongst other implications as well, whether or not it's visual, and people again are going to have different views on that. So again, we'll be seeking and looking to go through the public consultation, seeking appropriate views, and no doubt we'll be getting a lot of feedback through. So the idea is to try and keep the PSPO simple, straightforward, where you can go, where you can't go, signposting to display that, appropriate signposting on the Monmouthshire Council website as well, and hopefully to keep expense to a minimum with minimal fencing, additional fencing, etc.
And just to add to that, obviously you don't want to introduce another hazard, do you, if you put metal fencing on a rugby pitch. And my sons all played rugby. It's not necessarily 6 foot from the touchline. Is how far do you take the fence back so you don't have people colliding in metal fencing. So you've got to be very conscious of consequences of fencing. Certainly we do have it around most of our play areas, but yeah, there's other factors that would have to be taken into consideration, particularly contact sports, which these parts are generally used for.
Just one final point, if I may. The vast majority of the Leeds areas and exemption areas proposed, I think, are simple and straightforward. And there's just going to be a focus on a few which need to be fine-tuned. I think that's going to be the message coming through. It's going to be the bigger park areas which are going to attract the attention. Out of 100 or so areas where we've got the children's play areas which are fenced, very simple, they can easily be seen. The vast majority of people are going to agree with those and see the sense in it. But there is going to be a few areas which attract quite a few comments, and obviously that's the idea of a public consultation, to look at them and come back then to committee in a few months' time.
That's lovely. Thank you, Hugh. Obviously, we're a county of dog lovers here in Monmouthshire, and something to be very proud of. Unfortunately, there is always a minority who are ruining it for the majority of us. Thank you, members, for your contributions. They were great as usual. Members obviously are very concerned about law-abiding dog owners being negatively impacted by the exclusion zones. Especially with regards to families wanting to include their dogs, going out for family days, attending fetes and the different events we have going on around the county. Dogs not being walked properly, I thought was a really good point raised by I can't remember who raised it now, actually. I do apologise. And we need to encourage better dog ownership. I think I really agree with. How are we going to accommodate rural commons, footpaths and bridleways and incorporate this into our report? Overflowing dog bins are a huge concern, and we need to raise awareness that if there is a dog bin overflowing, we need to encourage residents to take their waste home. Dangerous dogs, I think this is a concern of everyone. We're seeing it more and more in the papers and in mainstream media. I personally would welcome more collaborative work with Welsh Government in tackling these puppy farms and irresponsible backstreet dog breeders, which are causing a huge problem around the country. Dangerous dogs, we want, you've defined the 2-metre lead, but where does that leave the dog extension leads? I do use an extension lead because I am a very nervous dog owner, and I do worry about not being able to get my dog back if another dog should attack or anything like that. Signage has too much dialogue, one member raised. There needs to be more graphic, simple signage. I'm not a massive fan of giving dog fouling the red card. I don't think that's a clear enough message when it comes to dogs. And obviously Intel is very critical with regards to enforcement. So I'd like to thank everyone, and I really look forward to the results of this consultation coming back. I think we're going to have some split decisions on some of the public's opinion, but thank you ever so much, Hugh and Dave. Next, we'll move on to item 7, regeneration priorities and funding. And I believe you're going to do the introduction, Councillor Griffiths. Oh, I do apologise. I didn't let Anne Webb come in. I'm so sorry. And Thomas. I'll let Anne and Thomas quickly come in.
Just really quickly, and thank you, Chair. Thank you for allowing me to speak, and congratulations on your appointment. Just quickly, Mr. Owen was talking about an extra tool. I was just wondering if in the future all dogs could be registered and their DNA recorded. This would probably have, I think on the continent this is the case, correct me if I'm wrong, and I think this would be an amazing step forward, and perhaps we could think about this in the future. Also, when you're consulting with town and community council, this is always a thing that always community and town councils are saying, oh, we won't consult it at the right time. Could we please ensure that we know when the dates of their meetings are in June and July, in order that we don't miss the important consultation? I know that we have already consulted, but even so, it's annoying when we hear the day after a meeting that the county council want their views on a certain issue. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Anne.
Yeah, just quickly on that. Certainly, yes, we endorse the national drive to improve the chipping and the registration, as you say, Councillor Webb, so that is ongoing. Gareth Walters particularly engaged in that. We've got the national animal licensing team. We're the host to the national team, so we're very close to that, and the decision makers in Welsh Government. So we're doing that. Certainly on the dates, yeah, clearly, obviously, town and community councils take responsibility for that. But I think, as Hugh's outlined throughout, that communication will be thorough and extensive. So we'll certainly let you know exactly when it is before it happens. So we won't be telling you it's going to run on the 11th, on the 10th. We'll tell you, as soon as we know, we'll give you plenty of forewarning. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Davis?
Thanks, Chair. And apologies, I can see that you're keen to make speedy progress with the agenda, so I'll keep my comments and questions brief. Just a quick one. Can officers either confirm today or perhaps in writing to this committee how many fixed penalty notices were issued in the past 12 months for dog fouling across the county? And second, I note from the reports that the Cabinet last reviewed the levels at which fixed penalty notices were fixed in September 2016. Will this committee, or will the Cabinet be encouraged by officers to reflect again on the current fixed penalty notice level, given, as I think the officers acknowledged, any enforcement needs to be proportionate and reasonable? Are we satisfied that a fixed penalty notice of £100 will be a sufficient deterrent to make meaningful progress with the public, and more importantly, as I think we've visited as part of this committee, to command the public's wider confidence in this dog fouling order? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Yeah, I can advise there have been no fixed penalties issued for dog fouling in the county in the last 12 months. Our concentration and focus really has been on raising awareness and doing good work. And as we've got, for example, the awareness day today in Caldicot, ask other parts of the council. So encouraging good behaviour is what we've been focusing on. And yes, certainly when we come back with the PSPO, it would be an opportunity to look at the FBN to report on the proposed fixed penalty notice level again, and to advise members of the intentions moving forward.
Thank you. Right, we'll now move on to item 7, regeneration priorities and funding. I can see Mark Hand has joined us now, but I will hand over to Councillor Griffiths for an introduction.
I'll just wait, Chair, for the players to change position. So I'm accompanied by both Mark Hand and Dan Fordham, who will be leading on the report. I'll provide an introduction. Showing continuity in your deliberation. It was only at your last meeting that you discussed the proposals that had been developed on Mono Street in Monmouth, and your deliberations fed into a cabinet discussion only last week, I think. The question you raised then was how would a scheme such as Mono Street actually be funded, and what the timescale for implementation might be. So the report that you've got before you today aims to take us forward and to seek your views on funding priorities and funding timetables. There are two core recommendations in the report, but there will be many other issues you might want to bring up. There are at the moment two potential funding routes. One funding route would be that from the UK government through its Levelling Up fund. There have been 2 rounds of this fund so far, and as we've reported to this committee and council, Monmouthshire County Council has not received any funding from round 1 or round 2. The UK government has indicated clearly, to the extent I would call it a commitment, that there will be a levelling up fund round 3. But having said that, the arrangements and the timing of that 3rd round remain unclear. In the announcement, they referred to round 3 allocations being made within the term of the current UK government, so that could take us through to the end of next year, 2024. But as yet, the details of that funding round, the criteria for that funding round, the application process, when bids would be submitted, when bids would be appraised, when they would need to be implemented, all of that is still unknown. So we're dealing with a degree of uncertainty, but it is incumbent on us to be prepared amidst that uncertainty, such that when the funding becomes available, we're agile enough to have good schemes ready to submit. And the recommendation for you to consider today is that in the Levelling Up Fund round 3, Monmouthshire County Council focuses its bid on the regeneration of Caldicot. So that's a very clear statement of priority. We've discussed this already with the Sevenside Area Committee. They are supportive of that priority. They're also supportive that in the circumstances of uncertainty, of limited time frames, that it makes sense for us to work on the outline of the previous bid for Caldicot. They were not supportive of any radical rethink in the current circumstances. So we'll be working on a bid with the 3 strands which were there on the previous bid, improvements to the public realm, Newport Road, the acquisition of retail property along Newport Road in Caldicot for it to be repurposed and represented for use, and the refurbishment of the existing leisure centre. That bid was a good bid, was submitted last time. We've got to learn from the fact that that wasn't successful there. We've got to consider how the design could be improved, how the justification for that investment can be more clearly explained, and that's work with the support of this committee we can be undertaking at this stage. The last time round, the costing of those 3 strands was around 24 million. There's been inflation since. We need to consider the overall cost of the scheme going forward, and we need to take account ultimately when we get the details of whether those costs fit the parameters of the scheme when it's finally announced. In addition to that recommendation that we focus on Caldicot for levelling up funding in the next round, there is also the recommendation, takes you back to your last meeting, that we make a priority of implementing the scheme for Mono Street in Monmouth as a bid for the strategic funds of the Welsh Government's Transforming Town. This is likely to have a cost of 6 million or more, and we're seeking your view and ultimately the view of Cabinet on making this the priority for that particular fund. you may well ask then, well, those are two schemes, and you may consider them to be very worthwhile schemes, but the county is a lot bigger than Caldicot or Monroe Street. And I would want to stress, and it's indicated in the paper, that the rest of the county is by no means excluded forevermore from seeking funding, but we will be putting significant stress on the placemaking plan exercises which have taken place in Usk, in Chepstow, and you got later in this agenda the fruits of the Chepstow exercise. We are commencing those placemaking plan exercises in Monmouth, Meagher-and-Undy, and Abergavenny. And future priorities, I think quite rightly, will emerge through that creative and collaborative exercise which will take place in each of those towns to identify the vision for those towns and the priorities within those towns. So rather than bring to you now a long list of, if you like, county-led priorities, we've brought those two schemes forward. We will now take a step back. We will partner the communities and the town councils elsewhere. We'll allow those placemaking exercises to come to their conclusions, and we'll reflect on those in suggesting in due course a further set of priorities from funding from those exercises. So that's my introduction, if you like, and it is likely that, I think, Dan, you may want to take us through any detail, and you'll certainly be asking Dan the questions as we go forward.
Thanks, Councillor Griffiths. You've covered actually all of the kind of key points that I was going to draw members' attention to in my introduction, so probably move on with your permission to questions, any specific points that you wanted to raise.
Lovely. I just want to declare a personal but non-prejudicial interest. During the administration of 21-22, I was the Cabinet Member for Social Justice and Community Wellbeing, which Levelling Up was part of. So I just wanted to declare that. So members, I will hand over to you for questions. Thank you ever so much, Councillor Griffiths. Are there any questions? Councillor Jackie Strong.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for, the reports that have come through today. I've just got a very quick question. I note, looking through the sort of reinvigorated sort of bid for Caldicot, that on Sevenside Area Committee we're exploring how we can make Sevenside and Caldicot in particular more of a dementia-friendly, inclusive, sort of disability-friendly sort of community, and I'm really pleased to see that has been put into the report. I just wondered, have we had feedback from the previous left bid? Have we had any feedback from why we weren't successful?
Yes, we had feedback informally on the first round bid 2 years ago, and then some feedback in writing on the LUF 2 bids that we submitted last year. I have to say it's of limited helpfulness. It suggests that both of our bids into both the regeneration focused bids in Caldicot and in Monmouth were relatively strong, but with areas for improvement. It's not enormously specific about the kind of nature of that improvement from memory. From discussions with colleagues in the with UK government colleagues, I think strengthening the kind of the narrative and the rationale for investment in these places is one of the areas that we'd want to focus on, and building a more coherent case for that combination of intervention. So in the case of Caldicot, the three projects that we focused on previously around the public realm, the 743 Newport Road, so the commercial building and the leisure centre. What's the case for intervention in general, and then what's the rationale for these three projects specifically? And I think there's an opportunity there around looking at the data that we have, kind of socioeconomic data, and particularly on health outcomes in Caldecott and in the wider Sevenside area, and then strengthening that formed part of our rationale in the Levelling Up 2 bid, that focus on health and well-being. But I think there's more than we can do there, and there's an opportunity, as you've said, to draw into that this idea of creating a kind of disabled and dementia-friendly environment, and that we can demonstrate the potential to improve that, both through change to the public realm in the town centre, which is one of the projects, through the creation of this well-being hub in refurbishing the leisure centre, but then also in how the commercial building, House 743 Newport Road, might be used. The bid last year included, it has to be said, relatively high-level proposals for a new community space in the largest unit in 743 Newport Road, the Store 21 unit, and there's currently a temporary, as you know, community use in there. So what role that might play in kind of reinforcing that narrative, building that case around a focus on health and well-being in a Caldecott bid, and the connections between services that might be delivered through that facility, connections between that and provision in the leisure centre more widely. I think that's something to focus on in improving the bid for this time.
Lisa, can I just come back in?
Of course you can.
That's really good to hear that sort of update. In another scrutiny committee, we've had discussions around access for disabled people around toilet provision, and I'm just really just trying to flag up that if you haven't got access to if you can't access an accessible toilet or feel comfortable within the sort of, public realm, then it actually sort of means that you don't go out, you don't engage with the community. So I'm just wondering whether a sort of change in space and something could be incorporated into what was the Store 21 sort of building, because that would give extra sort of input for other groups to use it, really. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the report highlights the need for us to do some more work in strengthening, in developing our proposals for 743 Newport Road and for that community use. And yeah, that kind of provision, the changing places provision, would be a really useful addition to that, I think.
Thank you. Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, Danny, I'd like to say, actually, I really wanted to hear what you were going to say, because I think it's very important we as a committee hear from the officers. You've been in it from the very beginning, so please do your remarks, because it gives us an insight, and then we can scrutinise it properly. What I'd like to say is, sort of reading through the reports, it seems that the sort of core of it, and something that should be completely sort of at the forefront of everyone's mind, is the fact that it's regenerating sort of town centres is to encourage visitors and rural residents to come back to the town centres and to enhance people living in the towns and their environment, and that should be absolutely core at everything we do, which I do. I definitely get a feel from that from your reports. That's excellent. Caldecott is a very knotty problem and needs addressing. So it's great that you're sort of concentrating on it. It should be so much of benefit, and it needs serious attention. So that's great. What I would like to say is just to consider, really, for residents of Monmouthshire, what are the resource implications in developing all these schemes? How are you factoring in the cost of them? Thank you.
Thanks. I refrained from going through the kind of overview that I prepared, because you don't necessarily need to hear the same points twice, but and most of the key points that I'd identified to share, Councillor Griffiths has already gone through. But But if there are specific questions, I'm obviously very happy to answer them. In terms of the resource implications, so they're set out in the report. Obviously, more work needs to be done in developing both the set of proposals for the Caldecott Levelling Up scheme and also the Mono Street proposal that is recommended here for funding through Transforming Towns in order to get a precise idea of costs. But we can work on the basis for now of cost estimates that we've developed previously. As Councillor Griffiths said, the total cost of the 3 projects that were submitted for the Levelling Up Fund bid last year in Caldecott was £24 million. So it's a significant cost there. The Levelling Up Fund doesn't have a specific match funding requirement, but local match funding of 10% from memory is encouraged. And our match funding commitment, MCC's match funding commitment in the bid last year was just under 2 million, with also underwriting match funding assumptions from other sources of around 3 million. Now, whether or not that will be the same this time remains to be seen, not least because we don't know yet what the maximum level of funding that will be available from the Transforming Towns programme will be. So in previous rounds of Levelling Up, bids of up to £20 million, seeking Levelling Up funding of up to £20 million have been invited. We may find that maximum, that ceiling, is lower this time. So we understand from colleagues in the Department for Levelling Up that around about 50 million is available for Wales in total. So it may be that in order for that funding to be distributed around Wales, that the total amount of funding that can be bid for in any single bid from any single authority will be lower. And of course that will therefore influence the amount of match funding that will be required. On Transforming Towns, there's a minimum match funding requirement of 30%. So on the basis of the cost estimates developed last year for Mono Street for a broadly similar scheme, not precisely the scheme that we've now developed because that's been through very extensive consultation and design development since. The broad parameters are similar though. The total cost of that scheme is estimated at around 6 million, and therefore our assumptions in terms of capital match funding from other sources, likely to be from MCC, is around, on that assumption, around 1.8 million.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Lucas.
Hi, thank you very much. Really, yes, it's Mono Street thing. It's amazing that we're prepared to go in for these bids, whether it's Caldecott or Monmouth or anywhere else. Totally get about the facilities in Caldecott. I think that's a very good idea. Thank you. But in reference to Mono Street, and I know you think I'm harping on about this, but I'm sorry, I am aware, so deeply aware, been made aware of how many people feel let down by not being, and I know you say you've been consultating, and yes, you have, but there wasn't that basic question of, do we want it or don't we want it? That aside, the bit that really perhaps does worry me is how long, if we do get money for it, which let's hope we do, how long it will take the street out of action, because our shops are really struggling, and what shops we have, we need to support so desperately. So it really worries me. And the other day I was on the high street and I looked, and the height of the middle of the street to a shop floor, and it was I was stood in the gate, the doorway of the works. The height to the middle of the road is going to be 2 foot higher. The road's going to be 2 foot higher. So assuming that we need to obviously control the drainage, etc., of that means dropping it at least to that level. That is humongous, and I mean, and I can't even begin to imagine. I haven't got the knowledge, but the engineering of all of that is going to be huge, and therefore the effect to our town is going to be huge. And it really worries me that we need to make sure that everybody understands and timescales of what can happen on this, please, because that's a real thing for Monmouth. You know, it could be a life and death moment of breaking or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Buckler. Daniel, would you like to come in there?
Yes, so in terms of the timescales for implementation of that scheme, I think we talked about it at the last meeting. We'll need to do some more work on the detailed design, which we're getting underway now following the Cabinet decision last week. But my assumption at the moment is that the delivery period for that scheme would be somewhere between 6 and 9 months. It is, of course, the case that that there would be no point at which Mono Street is closed, in the sense that we'd look to be supporting businesses to remain open throughout, and those works would not be across the whole street for the whole of that period. Again, this is subject to doing the detailed design and then appointing a contractor and negotiating with them, but my assumption is that that work would be phased so that different sections of Mono Street would be delivered at different times. I think, and I said this last time, it's inevitable with a regeneration scheme of this scale that there will be some disruption, and I think that would be the case irrespective of the kind of details of the scheme. That, you know, if there is a kind of a consensus, if nothing else, that regeneration, that improvement is required in Mono Street, any type of scheme that we delivered would inevitably cause some disruption. Our role in delivering that will be to ensure that that's kept to a minimum and that the effect on businesses is kept to a minimum. And then one would hope that the benefits of that in the longer term, in terms of that improved environment, which is very much driven by the needs of businesses and by the need to draw more people into Monmouth to create additional footfall, will make that short-term disruption worthwhile.
Thank you. And Councillor Davis?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Daniel. My question's about the rural economy and specifically how these regeneration priorities and funding priorities align with the replacement local development plan, which officers and indeed the Cabinet member will recall, and I quote, identified a huge challenge from rural isolation, a huge challenge pertaining from sustaining rural communities, and an urgent need to regenerate the rural economy. Now, I understand that we are going to be focusing through these bids on those principal towns, which are, of course, in much need of improvement and investment. And believe me, I don't want to descend into a game of them and us, but I would appreciate some clarity or some further context as to what is this administration's ambitions for regenerating the rural economy, and more importantly, how might the rural economy, and particularly our villages and smaller towns and hamlets, be reflected in future regeneration priorities for funding. Thank you.
I think perhaps...
Mr. Griffiths, would you like to come in there?
Thanks very much, Chair. I agree very much with the questioner that it would be counterproductive for this county to ever set rural interests against urban interests. There's nothing to be gained in doing that, and I don't think it would be a genuine distinction. Our rural communities benefit as much as the urban neighbourhoods in ensuring the vitality of the towns. They are users of the towns. Their quality of life is very much influenced by the quality of those towns. That doesn't mean that all investment has to be town-centric. I've described the importance that we accord to our placemaking plans. The previous administration, I think in an imaginative way, replicated that placemaking concept by having its Wye Valley Villages exercise, and there exists there a vision for and an investment plan for the Wye Valley Villages, and there's a delivery group associated with that. So the fact that we have these investments suggested now in our towns is not, it can support rural settlements and is not to the exclusion of investment in those rural settlements, and we need to continue with the example of that Wye Valley exercise.
the only thing I was going to add to that is to reinforce that point, the value of investment in town centres. I think there's a kind of general recognition that the towns in the county are hubs for rural communities, and therefore investment in the quality of provision in the town centres is itself an investment in those wider communities.
Sorry, Chair, can I chip in as well, just from, I guess, the planning policy point of view in the replacement LDP that was Councillor Davis's sort of starting point. National and local planning policy is very much town centre focused, and it's gone from what was more about a retail focus on town centres to everything. So bringing those things back into town centres, so that will be and has to be the focus around the planning policy side of things. But there's certainly policies and work that's coming forward and will be available to be scrutinised under the deposit plan in the future around how we do secure affordable housing in some of our rural settlements and ensure they're sustained in that way. But yeah, in terms of this sort of regeneration work, it is focused on town centres, based partly on planning policy, and also, by definition, the Welsh Government's Transforming Towns funding has to be spent in towns. So there is that emphasis at the moment.
Thank you. Councillor Brim.
Thank you very much. I was thinking mainly of, with this new reformed Transforming Town bid, will funding be sought both to improve both Monmouth Street and Blestium Street? I feel the public will be fully behind the rejuvenation of the car park and riverfront space in Monmouth, the gateway to our wonderful town, which is currently underutilised and somewhat unsightly, being the home to the jarring twin sites of the statuesque Norman Bridge and the 1970s toilet block. Can officers confirm that this new bid will consider the two zones as well as the lanes connecting the High Street in order to improve accessibility, as that seems to be what's killing the town currently? Thank you.
So the specific bid that's proposed here is for delivery of the Mono Street scheme. But the Blestium Street scheme and those wider issues about connectivity into Mono Street are things that we'd be looking to take forward through the placemaking plan that we are just getting going on with Monmouth Town Council, just starting work on with Monmouth Town Council. The Blestium Street scheme in particular, the work that was done on that in developing that scheme is now some years old, and and we need to revisit that. Perhaps through the placemaking plan, confirm that the aspirations in that kind of that inform that design are still valid and that still command support in the way that, I mean, certainly seems to be the case from the conversations that we've had in consultation on Mono Street, and then develop that design to a level of detail where, as the Mono Street scheme is now, where we can seek funding for delivery. So although the Blestium Street scheme probably isn't at that point now, we can develop that in parallel so that when there are opportunities for regeneration funding in the future, that could potentially form a bid to future funding sources.
And the leading, the lanes leading from the car park to Mono Street, which is kind of like the lifeblood really of the main street, will that be part of this bid?
Again, that doesn't form part of this proposal specifically, so we're seeking funding to implement the Mono Street design that we've developed over the last 6 months, which focuses on Mono Street itself. The design does look to kind of emphasise where those existing links are, so to improve kind of permeability and make movement through the town laterally as well, kind of more intuitive. Obviously, there are constraints in terms of where those connections exist at the moment. So at the moment, we can only emphasise the connections where they exist. There is a wider piece of work, and I think a longer-term piece of work to do about how we improve that connectivity. I think the thinking on that is to be done through the placemaking plan, and the planning colleagues are working wherever they can to try to encourage developers to improve those routes and introduce those routes where opportunities arise. But we need to think perhaps more broadly through the placemaking plan about exactly what form that improvement needs to take in the longer term so that we can build on the work that the Mono Street scheme does.
Chair, if you Sorry, Chair. I was just going to say, if you don't mind, it might help, just the addition. I know some members on this committee have been involved in placemaking plans already. Some haven't. So for those who haven't, it is looking at sort of a regeneration master plan for towns. They're being co-produced with the relevant town council. We're just starting, as Dan mentioned, on Monmouth, Magerwithdundee and Abergavenny, and having meetings with those to get sort of a tender procurement out. But they are on the forward planner for this committee, so once those plans are developed, we'd be looking to adopt them, and for the town council, the respective town council to adopt them, and we're proposing they come back before this committee for scrutiny before that happens. So I guess just to flag that up, there'll be more chance for this committee to be involved in that level of detail later on.
And of course, we have a live example on the agenda next with the Transforming Chepstow Master Plan.
Of course. Yeah, well done, Dan.
Okay. Thank you, officers, and thank you, members, for your scrutiny of the proposed projects in Monmouthshire. And I think I'm right in saying you support the planned recommendations, but you've made valid comments around dementia-friendly projects, more accessible provisions. There's questions around resource implications, and whilst this work is focused on regenerating towns, we cannot neglect our rural economy. And I think that now leads us swiftly on to the next paper, but I am going to allow a 5-minute toilet break or refreshment. So if officers and members would like to grab a drink, and then we'll come back and move on to Transforming Chepstow Master Plan. Thank you.
Chair. We can hear you now.
Lovely. Okay, so we'll move to item 8, the final paper for today, Transforming Chepstow Master Plan, and I'll hand over to Councillor Griffiths for an introduction.
Sorry, Chair, could I just come in? I'm new to the Scrutiny Committee. I just wanted to declare a personal but non-traditional interest in that I I chair the steering group for the Usk Improvement Plan.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Howells.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, if I can provide the introduction, I hope you find these introductions of some use. The recommendations that you get in these reports are recommendations, whilst I might not have written the report, they're my recommendations, they're the recommendations of the Cabinet. So I'm available for scrutiny along with our officers. The Transforming Chepstow Master Plan is there before you. I've, if you like, been dual-hatted here. I'm a Cabinet member, but I'm also a member of Chepstow Town Council through some of the background on this work. Over the last year, there's been a steering group that's consisted of nominated town councillors and the county councillors in Chepstow. They've worked with our officers, MCC officers, they've worked with an appointed consultant in developing this master plan that's before you. The town councillors themselves would say that the gestation has been a lot longer than the year referred to. They worked for several years on preparations for what was then called a place plan. They developed a whole range of ideas in consultation with the community, working with Planning Aid Wales, and those ideas fed into the placemaking plan exercise. The process, I think, has been a creative one. Those on the steering group, on those councillors, but crucially involving community groups, involving formal community consultation at a variety of stages. The plan itself was in its final form agreed by the steering group, and last night was put to the town council itself and agreed by the town council. It's come to you today on the basis of what the town council has had to say, what you will say. It will then go to Cabinet, and if Cabinet approves, we've got a master plan which will inform investment bids for Chepstow for the coming period. As with all our placemaking plans, and Chepstow Town Council decided that placemaking was not a word, a phrase that people in Chepstow would necessarily understand, so they decided to call their plan Transforming Chepstow. But as far as Welsh Government's concerned, it's a placemaking plan. It's an investment plan. It can inform, it can allow bids for projects within Chepstow, remembering what Welsh Government wants to see is that any of those bids are informed by a vision for the whole town, and that's the purpose of this document. There are, as you see there, numerous ideas have been generated by the process, by the community themselves. Paragraph 315 gives you a flavour of those before you go into the detail, but a flavour of an ambition to improve the quality of the high street, to make funding available for individual properties within that high street. That will never be a substitute for private sector investment, but it could complement in certain cases. Play provision in the Dell, a very ambitious scheme which will be taken forward to make Chepstow a destination for families, putting in a very ambitious play facility within the Dell. Improving connectivity within the town is there. the development of the Arts Centre, which has been in Chepstow for some time, but has got a lot more potential than has currently been delivered. Again, they're in the priorities put forward through this process. It's come to you. I very much welcome your comments, but you'll recognise that your comments are there to complement several years' work by the community of Chepstow, by the town and county councillors and their official staff who've undertaken this exercise and have put this document together.
Thanks, Councillor Griffiths. I'll just say a few more things about the process. So, as the report says, the Transforming Chepstow Master Plan is proposed as a placemaking plan for Chepstow. We were just discussing, I think, on the previous item that we already have things that serve the function of a placemaking plan, even if they're not necessarily called that, in Caldecott and in Usk, as well as in the Wye Valley villages. Given the requirement from Welsh Government for placemaking plans to be in place, or at least to be in development, in order for a town to be eligible for Welsh Government regeneration funding, Welsh Government Transforming Towns funding, we're now in the process of developing placemaking plans for all of our other towns. So this is the kind of first of that second phase that's now reached completion, and we're getting going, started work with town councils, and we'll be engaging other local stakeholders in developing placemaking plans for Abergavenny, for Megawithundi and for Monmouth over the next few months. Although, as Councillor Griffiths says, the placemaking plan work that we've been doing in Chepstow builds on work that's been going on for a number of years in the development of a place plan and the thinking that the town council has done in terms of their vision, their aspirations for Chepstow through that piece of work. The work that we've done over the last year or so with the town council has been a really positive process, and one I think that we can learn from in developing these placemaking plans in the other towns as we take them forward. The Chepstow Placemaking Plan, the Transforming Chepstow Master Plan that you've got as the Appendix 1 to this report, is the product of a really extensive process of stakeholder engagement and then in public consultation in developing all of the kind of elements that I would expect to see in a placemaking plan in general. So there is a vision for the town that kind of sets out a shared view of what success looks like here, what are we aiming for, and some high-level aims that sit underneath that. And then the most important part from my perspective is the action plan, is the projects. So this is our vision, our shared vision between the county council, the town council, the stakeholders, what we're actually going to do collectively to bring that about, and that's the action plan that you've got there. Consultation on the proposals ran for 3 weeks or so in October of last year. We had a couple of days of drop-in events, and we had just under 400 people responding to a survey, so a good response rate there. And that gave us some important feedback on people's concerns, key issues around the concerns around the town centre, the identity of the town centre, kind of its distinctiveness, about the condition of the town centre, and then what's there, kind of activities in the town centre. Concerns around lack of provision for young people, concerns around the need for more and better community provision, places to meet and support community cohesion, concerns around the need to manage infrastructure in supporting growth. And so that's very much informed the vision and the aims that are set out in the plan and the project. And Councillor Griffiths has already given you a quick run through of those, so I shan't repeat that. What I would say is that in total, I think through that process of engagement with stakeholders and the public and identifying some of the really good work that's already happening, there are, I think, 20 or 30 projects that we've identified in the master plan. It's really important that we are able to prioritise within that. It's very difficult with the resources that we have as the county council and as the town council and others, very difficult to deliver 20 or 30 projects, and so we've sought to focus that down. That's why you've got 10 priority projects that are identified here. Those are projects that came out of that process of stakeholder and public engagement, and then the town and community councils, town and county councillors have taken the lead on that process of prioritising, of identifying the projects which are the ones that we want to focus on now. So that's kind of headlines from me, but again, happy to take questions.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Councillor Griffiths. I'll hand over to members. Councillor Buckler.
Thank you, Chair. It seems to me with the Chepstow master plan, the vital thing about Chepstow is the traffic volume. It's the most problematic, and it seizes Chepstow. People don't want to go near it because they can't face it. And there's also the transport servicing Chepstow. There's a real problem with this and the surrounding areas. So without this being resolved, all the master plans in the world for Chepstow seem, to be halted. So how are you progressing the idea, for instance, of a bypass in Chepstow to relieve this? I've got one other question, which is the bidding for sort of a Welsh Government transforming town centres for Monmouth, which Councillor Griffiths has stated as a hugely important priority. What implication will it have for the transforming Chepstow funding bid? Because obviously money is finite. So if you could clarify, that would be great.
Sure. So on the question around transport, the focus in the master plan is on measures principally that are about reducing demand and encouraging people to demand for vehicle traffic, reducing the level of vehicle traffic by making it easier to use other modes of transport. So they're identified in the list of priority projects there, the bus rail interchange, improvements to public transport, improvements to active travel infrastructure that are about getting people off the road and making it easier to move around by other means. I think, notwithstanding the issues around traffic, what's really one of the things that is really important in attracting visitors to a town, attracting people to use a town centre, whether that's local people who live in the town, people who live in the areas around the town that it's hinterland, or visitors from further afield, is the quality of the environment in the town centre and the quality of the services and of the activity that's there. And so that's very much part of this focus here as well, that irrespective of transport, that there are attractors in Chepstow town centre that bring people in there irrespective of those transport issues. In terms of the funding, so the Transforming Towns funding that's available now is a programme running over the next 2 years, so until March 2025. Although there's no certainty, one expects that there'll be further regeneration funding available after that. Monmouthshire has been allocated just over £1 million of placemaking grant funding. That's Transforming Towns funding for small projects. And some of that in turn is already allocated to projects in Chepstow. So for example, the High Street Vacant Property Campaign and the High Street Building Improvement Grants, which are identified as priorities with the master plan, we can begin to take that forward through placemaking grant over the next couple of years, and as further funding becomes available, we can develop that further. There aren't identified in the highest priorities here projects of the same scale as Mono Street, for which that larger the larger Transforming Town strategic funding would be required, although of course there is potential in the future, again, as more funding becomes available and if other projects emerge, that those could be developed and considered for that funding in future.
Thank you. I'd just like to add, I sound like a well-worn record, and I don't mean to, but obviously Monmouthshire is a very rural county, and it's not feasible for everyone who you want to attract to Chepstow. And it is a lovely place, Chepstow. It should be a lovely place to be and go. It's not practical to say people can't and won't use their cars, and we do need to consider how to incorporate people travelling by car, and then, as you say, making the centre of Chepstow more pedestrian friendly, active travel friendly. But it's not as black and white as as it may be sound. Thank you.
If I can just add, I very much take the theme of Councillor Buckler's question. The success of Chepstow in large part will rely on its ability to continue to draw in, because it's already happening, but to draw in those who are living in St Arvans, living in Tintern, living in Devorden, living in Shire Newton. Historically, Chepstow has been, if you like, a market town for those rural communities, and its success requires on that continuing. It's not a certain relationship. Development of facilities such as Cribbs Causeway means that some have chosen, if I'm going to get in the car, I might as well go to Cribbs as go to Chepstow, and so there's a threat there, and we've got to face up, in my Chepstow hat, face up to that challenge and make sure that our offer is a different one, and one which is attractive in comparison to other offers, and that will depend on improving access. So the point you make about traffic and parking are ones that need to be resolved. We're all aware of the efforts we're putting into getting movement on the High Beach roundabout. That's something in the gift of us in Wales. You mentioned the bypass. That's very much in the gift of UK government, probably a £200 million project, 90% of it to be financed by English highways, now rebranded as UK highways. We're very much in dialogue with Gloucestershire. Gloucester's priority has been in the north of its county, where it's getting funding. Whether the timing of which we could get priority in UK highways to have a parallel scheme in the south of Gloucestershire is one we'll continue to pursue, but it's by no means certain that it's going to happen in the near future. In which case, all this is relevant because we have to work in the world as we find it. It's not just the one that we would wish was in place.
Thank you, Councillor Buckler. Just wanted to come in there as someone that visits Chepstow on a weekly basis. I was pulling out of the junction at the top of town, and I was sat there for roughly about 7 minutes last Saturday, and all the cars coming down from Hardwick Hill, not one turned in to Chepstow town centre. It is people going over to the Forest of Dean or further afield, Lydney direction, or potentially going down to Tesco's. I think whatever happens with Barclays Bank will be critical in the future of Chepstow town centre. There needs to be a destination for people to go. I'd love to see something, whether that be a cinema, something similar to Newport Market. There's very little to offer in Chepstow town centre compared to years ago. There's some great little shops down Beaufort Square, but you need something for people to go to regular as well to draw in the footfall. When I go to Chepstow, I'm in and out because the traffic is building up so bad there, and it's becoming a nightmare to get out, and you're queuing for a considerable time. So we'll see what happens. Councillor Strong.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to just explore. There was a really great report, and I lots of really key sort of interesting things in the flexi transport idea, demand responsive transport, because I think this is going to be key to get people using sort of active travel routes or public transport or whatever. I note from my Twitter feed a few days ago that in Bristol they've got a sort of demand sort of little minibus. It's based on a sort of Uber ideas, and although this is more like a mini sort of bus route, I guess, but extended hours, I wonder whether to get people to be safely sort of transported to the if there was a cinema or down to the drill hall, wherever, and back home, you're going to need something a bit more flexible than just on the current bus routes. So that was just my thoughts. Obviously, if this works, this is going to have to be rolled out at Severn Tunnel and across the B4245. But thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that kind of flexibility is intended as part of this scheme. So although it might operate at fixed hours and on fixed routes, there is also the flexibility for kind of a demand responsive service where it's operating on a door-to-door basis as as people require.
Can I just come back in? Sorry.
Add to that on the flexi travel. It just shows the importance of having the placemaking plan and the fact that the vision is there, the objectives are sort of laid out there. Only about 3 months ago, GWR invited bids for funding of transport schemes which would support the railway. So the Town Council is developing a bid, pretty close to completing a bid for a feasibility study to be financed by GWR, which will look at both a sort of inner Chepstow electric vehicle bus, if you like, which would circle around Chepstow, so linking the station to the various parts and back, and testing the complementarity of that with a provision of electric bike hire as well. So two ideas which they hope to get funding from GWR to test the feasibility of that, but informed by the placemaking plan. So the idea was there, and it allowed them to be ready to make a bid when the bid opportunity arose.
Chair, can I just come back in?
Of course.
That's really interesting to sort of the concept is being explored in that way. I'm just sort of thinking back to when we had the budget proposals and there was sort of criticism that grassroots was being used by towns in Monmouthshire rather than rural areas. But I think the grassroots scheme is very sort of based on you can only go between 9:30, you've got to be back at 1, and it actually is very restrictive. But there is a real need for people to be able to go, possibly to meet with other friends and go to the garden centre for lunch or whatever. And that flexibility needs to be there. And you obviously don't get that door-to-door service with, a service bus, but it's really good that we're actually looking at the needs of our Monmouthshire population rather than just one size fits all, really.
Thank you, Councillor Strong. Are there any more questions from members? No? Okay, well, thank you for scrutinising the Transforming Chepstow Master Plan. Members have raised some questions and concerns around traffic issues that need to be resolved around the Chepstow area in order for the master plan to be successful. Flexible public transport to allow residents to visit the town centre, and there were some queries regarding funding allocations and whether or not the bid for the Monmouth project and whether this will impact Chepstow being successful. I'd like to thank Councillor Griffiths and officers for attending today and presenting these reports and answering questions. We'll move on to item 9, which is the Place Scrutiny Forward Work Programme. I know we have some new members. Have you had a look, members? Is there anything that you wish to add? No? Okay. And the Cabinet and Council Forward Work Plan. Is there anything on there that you wish to come to Place Scrutiny Committee? No? Okay. Okay. Confirm minutes of last meeting. Can I have a proposer and a seconder for that? Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Thomas. And the next meeting I've got down as the 6th of July, but I know Hazel wants to come in here. So I'll hand over to Hazel.
Thanks, Chair. We did have an agenda scheduled for the 6th of July, but the reports are not going to be ready. I believe Mark's here. I don't know if he wants to add anything, but I think we've rescheduled the business for later in the year. So. What I would propose, Chair, is your committee had a lot of additional meetings last year, and you're looking very, very busy as we go into the next year with lots of new things coming in from the corporate and community plan as well. So it's up to you as a committee, but we don't want to table things for the sake of it, and therefore it's for you to determine whether, if we don't get anything in the next sort of few weeks, whether we were to cancel that meeting.
Okay.
It's just a case of timescales have shifted.
Yeah, we had a lot of special meetings last year, so I'm happy, if members are happy, for us to remove that out of the calendar. What are your thoughts, members? If you could put a thumbs up, or if you have any
Happy
comments.
to support that proposal, Chair.
Yeah, but we're nodding in the room.
Oh, lovely.
We don't need to have meetings for their own sake.
Yeah, absolutely. We're all busy enough as it is. So I would like to thank members for their contributions today.
Sorry.
And
Sorry, Chair. So when will our next meeting be, please? If it's not on the 6th?
There won't be a meeting during August either, so it'll be September, I believe, Hazel.
Yes, that's correct, Chair.
Does that mean that September meeting is likely to be a mega meeting?
But more than likely, we'd split the meeting, so we might have a special meeting, because we don't like to have two or two, maximum 3 reports during a meeting. Would you agree, Hazel?
That just moved into September.
Yes, I mean, as it stands, our sort of agenda for July is just deferred into September. So we've got the economic development strategy, the local transport policy, and then the RDP preferred strategy. Now, I think even though they're 3 hefty items, there are clear linkages between all 3. So it would make sense that you consider them as a block. But I think you probably are in for a sort of 3-hour meeting there, maybe. So schedule a break, bring something to eat, and you know, I think be prepared that might be a bit longer. I think Councillor Lucas wants to come back in.
Yeah, Councillor Lucas.
Yes, sorry, Chair. I was just checking. So I've got a date of October the 28th. Is that when our next meeting is going to be? Because I can't see one in September unless I'm being blind.
We've got
a long way away.
We've got the 28th of September, and then the following one is the 9th of November.
Okay, lovely. Okay, thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon and enjoy the break next week. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.